Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about Ke Huy Quan. Okay, who is Ke Huy Quan? Well, Ke Huy Quan is a man who has recently returned to prominence. Okay, you probably know Ke Huy Quan as Short Round from the second Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So Ke Huy Quan actually went with his brother and his brother tried out for this role of Short Round, right? For Steven Spielberg, the number two, I would say the number two American director in the world. Number one is James Cameron. If you don't know, James Cameron has 3 of the top 4 movie box offices of all time. So Avatar, Way of Water, and Titanic are like 1, 3, and 4 of all time grossing films. Okay, so but Steven Spielberg is huge. Yeah, Jaws, Indiana Jones, E.T., a bunch of other stuff. Right, incredible films. Right. So Steven Spielberg is one of the most famous American. He is the second most famous director in the world, American director in the world. Actually, yeah, those are the same thing. There's no international. There's absolutely 0 international directors that I think even beat B-list American directors. Right? Like I think the top 10 named directors in the world are all American. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I am. Really. So yeah, you can come at me right in the comments, or if you think I'm wrong on any of that. All right, so basically, Steven Spielberg hired Short Round, who was had a lot of chutzpah, right? He was a young kid who had a lot of chutzpah, who helped Indiana Jones on his adventures in a specific part of the world, like when he was there, right? And Dr. Jones and Short Round were good friends. And by far the best description of their relationship is Batman and Robin, right? Like, Indiana Jones is the Batman, Short Round is the Robin. Short Round's bringing a lot of talent to the table, but he's learning 10 times more than, like, what's he getting paid? Is the dollar amount he's getting paid the important part, or is literally what he's learning from Dr. Jones far more valuable than the dollars he's being paid, right? Because they're gonna help him be an adventurer for the rest of. And actually now I'm thinking, wow, what if Short Round like had his own series, right? That seems like that'd be really cool. Like, I don't know. Okay, all right. So Ke Huy Quan, right? He is Short Round. Okay, now he was also in Encino Man, and he was in The Goonies, right? So he had a time in Hollywood where he was quite famous. He was world famous, right? There was a period between the mid 80s to the early 90s, just about a 5-year window, where Ke Huy Quan was banger, top rate famous, legit's famous, right? And then it all dried up. It dried up like overnight. Okay, now Ke Huy Quan remembered his days in Hollywood and had a true love for film, and so he stayed in the movie industry. He went behind the camera because he couldn't get any roles in front of the camera, right? And so for 37 years, he was out of the limelight, right? But rather than whine about it, he just went behind the camera, he worked, and he made a layman's wage, right? Like he didn't get paid the big checks, and he just became a grinder, somebody doing the work, right? And so he stayed in the movie industry, but he went behind the camera and he did his part, right? Well, along comes 2022. Michelle Yeoh, right, is brought in for Everyone, Everywhere, All at Once. All right. Now I saw this film, and actually, I'm almost positive I have some videos that talk about it, because I went to see it, and so Ke Huy Quan is in this, and he was hired by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, okay, who are paired directors, almost like the Duffer Brothers, or like the two guys who do like who did Civil War, those guys, right? So they've made a lot of progress, and so these guys come out and they make Everyone Everywhere All at Once, and it blows up. And right now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but like Everyone Everywhere All at Once is under significant consideration as an Oscar film. Okay, I get that, right? Yeah, and actually, I thought it was a great film that overshot in some areas, right? Like it had some, and it wasn't extremely well cast. Ke Huy Quan was extremely well cast. Michelle Yeoh was extremely well cast, but I think Awkwafina had been considered for the role, and the main young protagonist didn't really click with me. So like I was kind of like on the fence on the film, right? I felt like its concept was great, but its execution was off, right? Now, Ke Huy Quan was extremely good in his role as Waymond Wang, okay? All right, so this Oscar-nominated film now enters the scene. Ke Huy Quan comes back after 37 years, okay? Now, here's where it gets interesting, and here's what links to Dungeons & Dragons. So, Ke Huy Quan wins a Golden Globe for his work in Everyone, Everywhere, All at Once, okay? Steven Spielberg is literally in the room, right, as Ke Huy Quan is giving his speech, okay? Now we're going to talk about the OGLers specifically, the OGLers and the OSR specifically, okay? And we're going to put them in the place of Ke Huy Quan, right? So what did Ke Huy Quan do? And then what could he have done, which is what the OGLers and the OSR did to D&D in the 2023 Manic Panic in the January 3rd to January 28th OGL Crisis, right? Others call it the 2023 OGL Crisis. I call it the 2023 Manic Panic because that's what it was. And so let's get into it. Okay, so what does Ke Huy Quan do, right? So here's the thing. Steven Spielberg did two things. He hired Ke Huy Quan and gave him his career. No two ways about it. Steven Spielberg is 100% responsible for Ke Huy Quan's success. Okay? But Steven Spielberg also ignored him for 37 years and never called him back for any of the 25 to 50 movies that he did since. Okay? Now Ke Huy Quan is on top again, right? And Steven Spielberg's at the end of his career, and ain't nobody care about his movies, and they're all junk, right? None of them make any money. Nobody cares about them, right? So Ke Huy Quan up, being considered for Oscars. Steven Spielberg down, junk movies that only critics like, right? Like, so Ke Huy Quan has a moment to strike, right? He can remember that Steven Spielberg ignored him for 37 years, right? He can remember that, and now he can hit him where it hurts. He can get him back, right? You know what Ke Huy Quan does? He says, the way I was raised, you remember where you came from, and you remember who gave you your first shot, right? It's literally his words from speech, right? He's like, you remember who gave you your first chance. And then he literally says, thank you, Steven Spielberg. I'm so glad you're here, right, to see this moment, right? And he's like, hey, Steven, I'm up now, right? Like I got a chance to do something special, and I want to say thank you for giving me my start, right? I'm not going to say a word about the fact that you ignored me for 37 years, right? Because you gave me my start. It was on me to make it the rest of the way. It wasn't on you to carry me up the ladder every step of the way. There's supposed to be work on both sides, right? And so rather than take a dig at Steven Spielberg and remember the fact that Steven Spielberg didn't do anything for 37 years, he said, thank you, Steven Spielberg. I remember what you did for me, and I'm so glad you're here, right? Now, let's talk about the OGL. They had the same moment, right? The OGL comes out, the OGLers, they watch as OGL 1.1 drops to less than 20 companies, okay? Now, the OGLers community and the OSR, right? These leaks weren't sent to them. This communication wasn't to them, right? they step in and they immediately begin saying, D&D, be gone, right? So basically, my issue with what happened with the 2023 Manic Panic was the OGLers and the OSR came out, and you know what they said? They're like, hey, you gave us our start. There would be no OGL content without Dungeons and Dragons. Not for the OSR. The OSR would have nothing if it weren't for Dungeons and Dragons. The OGLers would have nothing if it wasn't for Dungeons and Dragons, right? And so when there's a misstep, right? There was a misstep. Steven Spielberg did nothing for Ke Huy Quan for 37 years, right? But Ke Huy Quan was like, no, I don't care about a misstep. I care about the start, right? I danced with the one who brung me, right? Like, and he was gracious and kind and forgiving, right? The OGLers and the OSR are the most repugnant, hateful group I have ever seen, right? The moment there was a misstep from Hasbro, right, what they do is they come in and say, not Hasbro be gone. They could have used that tag, right? Not WotC be gone. They could have used that tag. They said, D&D be gone. Burn it to ash. We don't want it to exist. No one ever again can buy, sell, own, read, run, watch Dungeons and Dragons. Burn it, right? Literally and figuratively. And when they said D&D be gone, not all of them, many of them were shockingly ignorant, right? So in the OGLers and the OSRs, you had a few who were ignorant of the idea that when they said D&D be gone, that, in my humble opinion, hate speech would drop directly onto 1983 hate speech, and it would hit harder because it had the weight of the same words being cried out from 1983, and it would hit like a sledgehammer with all the force of the hate from 1983 added to the hate of 2023, right? So basically what you're seeing with the OGLers, right, is they are Ke Huy Quan if Ke Huy Quan dug in and was like, hey, Steven, you gave me my first shot, but what I'm focusing on is the 37 years you didn't do anything for me, right? And you can kick rocks, Steven Spielberg, and I want Spielberg be gone. I don't want your movies to ever be bought, owned. I don't want anybody to watch them. I want you gone. I don't want you to I want all of your work expunged. I want everything ever that was ever attached to the name Spielberg gone. No existence. Not allowed. Ever. But he didn't, but Ke Huy Quan didn't say that, right? But the OGLers and the OSR did. They are the most repugnant, hateful people in the tabletop role-playing game community, in my humble opinion. And I will not forget. And I will not be gaslighted. And I will not be told that D&D be gone was a pun. They knew when they said D&D be gone that the hammer they were throwing, the virtual hammer that they were bringing to bear would have virtual weight added by the very real 1983 Satanic Panic, and they knew that threat, hatred, contempt, and judgment would echo down 40 years to add to the impact of the words D&D be gone. And in my humble opinion, I think Hasbro 100% capitulated on the OGL 1.0, right? 100% capitulation and more, because Hasbro was terrified. And they had every reason to be terrified, in my humble opinion, because the OGLers and the OSR absolutely, not all of them, just some of them, were knowingly using a virtual hate hammer with 40 years of momentum. And that's why it all ended in a month, right? And that's why Pathfinder sold 8 months of, that's why Paizo sold 8 months of Pathfinder stock, right? in 2 weeks. Those were hate purchases, right? And I'm telling you, in my humble opinion, Ke Huy Quan is a great man. He is kind and tolerant, and he has the discretion to say, when someone I know treats me well in the beginning and then missteps later, I will not forget the beginning. I will never forget the kindness. I will never weigh a slight over a start. And these repugnant, absolutely hateful, repugnant OGLers and OSRs knew what they were doing. And I will not stand by while a second attempt to destroy D&D goes, and while the revisionism and the lies pile up after the OGLers and the OSRs got what they wanted. It is horribly wrong, and I want to set the record straight. In my humble opinion, what I just said is the true record. And Ke Huy Quan's forgiveness and kindness and tolerance is the model. And these repugnantly hateful OGLers and OSRs, that is what we need to avoid. And that, their energy, right? The next group that comes to destroy Dungeons & Dragons forever, they will look different, right? And the OGLers and the OSRs, they look incredibly different than the 1980s Satanic Panic. And I don't know what's going to prompt a new group to come up to destroy Dungeons & Dragons again. I just know it's going to happen again. And I just know that I myself am on the wall. I am sentineling and I am watching, right? And I am going to very humbly ask you to consider moving beyond being a Dungeons & Dragons player, moving beyond being a Dungeons & Dragons dungeon master, and really considering, if you're a skilled dungeon master, please consider becoming a Dungeons & Dragons sentinel, someone who is going to watch for when this will happen, and so that we can have the receipts and we can show very clearly to people that this ain't the first rodeo. This will be the third rodeo, right? And we will have defenses in place, right, as brand advocates for Dungeons & Dragons. That's what I want to do at this point. If you have ideas on how to do that, I would love to hear them, right? But I would really encourage you to join me in that, in becoming a D&D sentinel, right? But in order to do that, you have to believe that that in 2023, a new group of people came to destroy Dungeons & Dragons. Because right now, the revisionism is thick. It is thick. Every word of what you just heard is my humble opinion. I'm very eager to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.